Hey guys, Brian Schultz here with Cape Falcon Kayak, and it has been a while since I've made one of these videos. If you remember in the last videos, I was just starting to scale the system up from what it was originally intended to do, which was just to make a small double-bladed pack canoe and explore the idea of using it to make larger single-bladed solo canoes, and then hopefully moving from there into double canoes, small rowboats, and small sailboats. And I was watching as a shaping anomaly that is pretty much inconsequential in the smaller boats here was becoming more and more pronounced as I was scaling the boats up larger and larger. And I felt like if I didn't stop to address that problem, it was going to back me into a corner as I scaled this up into larger sized boats in the future. So I decided to take a big step back, look at all my formulas, and see if I could figure out what was causing that problem. So I think I figured out what the issue was, and to test my theory, what I did was I built myself a new canoe of a totally different set of variables than anything I've built so far. Different length, different depth to beam, different rocker profile, different hull shaping. And the idea was that if the formula was correct, it would automatically spit out the boat shape I was looking for, and it did. And that is awesome because not only does that solve the shaping issue I was having, but it also frees me up from the final fixed variable in this canoe, which was the fixed depth to beam ratio. So now if I want to build myself something of a different depth to beam ratio, I can do that, which is going to be super helpful for both narrow pack canoes and also larger full-size single-bladed canoes. So let's start out by talking about the hull that I came up with for this boat and why I made some of the choices that I did, because I feel like this really illustrates what's so nice about working with a formula-based system where you can adjust the variables for your specific circumstances. Now, the first variable for this canoe was the length, and I wanted to go with a boat that was a little bit longer this time to explore the effect that that would have on cargo capacity, stability, and top speed. And I restricted that length to 13'7" in this case because that is the longest boat that will comfortably fit inside of my van, and I know that if I have to put something up on the roof, I'm way less likely to go paddling. Now, the next variable here is the width, and the width of this boat is 27.5 inches wide, and the reason that I made it that way is because that is the widest boat that I can enjoy paddling with a double-bladed paddle, but it's also the narrowest boat that I can effectively paddle with a single-bladed paddle, so it's a compromise between double and single-blade performance. Another compromise between double and single blade is the depth of the boat. I set the depth of this boat at 10.5 inches, which is about as deep as I want to be in a boat if I'm using a double-bladed paddle, and it's really about as shallow as you can possibly go if you want to really enjoy effective single-blade paddling. Now, the shear of this boat is the one thing that I left the same from the previous generation of the boats. I didn't mess with that at all. I feel like the 7-inch shear over a distance of 14 feet is a really good compromise between windage and seaworthiness. You will occasionally take a wave over the bow if you're out paddling in a really nasty shop, but honestly, that's not the kind of condition that you would want to be out in this kind of a boat anyways. The rocker on this boat, I did something different than I've done with any of the boats so far. It's still got the same gentle, continuous rocker along the keel, but I decided to add an additional progressive rocker right towards the ends, with the idea being that it would unlock the ends of the boat. So even though I'm making this boat longer, it would still give me the maneuverability that I personally like in a paddlecraft. So adding that progressive rocker definitely unhooked the ends of this boat, gave it a little bit more maneuverability, but just like every time that I've added more rocker to these boats, it comes at the cost of the performance of the sail. And this boat is designed to have a small crosswind/downwind sail integrated into the design. And this is one of those things where I'm not going to make a lot of compromises to try to make the canoe sail a lot better because this is primarily a paddlecraft, but I will tweak things just a little bit to get as much performance as I can out of that kind of minimalist sail rig. And in this case, to do this again, I would probably leave the progressive rocker out of the ends, but keep the gentle, continuous rocker. And I think that would give me the sweet spot between a maneuverability that I can stand and a sail performance that I still enjoy. So I guess my overall impression of this latest boat here is that with the exception of that progressive rocker that I added to the ends, I really like how this thing paddles. I really like how it feels on the water. The nice thing about having that extra length isn't necessarily the potential top speed, because most recreational paddlers are never pushing the kind of speeds that even a 13-foot water line is going to allow you to achieve. And truthfully, a longer water line usually just means more wetted surface and more drag. But one thing that a longer boat does add to the boat is that it adds a significantly more open cockpit, which is nice because sometimes in a 12-foot boat you can feel kind of like the ends are closing in on you. It also adds noticeably more stability as well. well. So I can sit on my butt or I can switch to my knees without having that tippy moment while I'm making the transition there. Another thing that's nice about the longer length of the boat is that it means that the potential cargo weight of this isn't as sensitive as it is in a smaller boat, where you really have to dial the paddler and cargo combination really closely to the intended displacement of the boat to get ideal performance. In this boat, I can be in this thing at 175 pounds. My girlfriend's comfortable in it at 140 pounds. My friend Tim is comfortable in it at 240 pounds. So there's just a lot more potential range there. And it's always going to be better if you can dial that really closely into the paddler that's going to be using it primarily, but it's nice to have more versatility there as well. So the last thing about this boat is not necessarily an upside, and that is because it's bigger, because it's longer, it weighs a little bit more. So the 12-foot version of this boat weighs 17 pounds. The 14-foot version of this boat here weighs 23 pounds. So that's a lot more weight, and it's not so much weight that it means that I'm not going to be using this boat, but it's definitely on the edge. I think anything bigger than this and I would have a hard time getting down to some of the more difficult access points to the water. And a couple times now I've actually grabbed the 12-foot boat even though I wanted to paddle this one, because that little 17-pound boat is just so convenient. So just different trade-offs, different choices. The nice thing about this system is that you can design whatever boat you want for whatever set of uses that you have on the water. So next thing I want to talk about here is everything else I've been working on for this canoe that doesn't necessarily relate to the hull shaping or to the building system. All the accessories, all the things that need to happen in the boat before you can get on the water. So a huge part of what I do here is just a lot of experimentation with different ways to set up the boat, different wind, different wave, different gear loading conditions. And through enough repetition, I end up coming up with really clean, really tight systems that I can then suggest to people for setting up their own canoes, because it's really important to me that your experience on the water actually matches the dream that you had when you were first building your boat. And that's something that doesn't always happen when people are building their own boats. So starting out with the sail rig here, the sail rig is mostly the same as it was, with the exception of the fact that I added a single fair-leaded clam cleat in addition to the open clam cleats that I have on either side of the gunnel here that's dedicated for the halyard. And this is one of those things that it's such a minor change, but it makes such a big difference in how easy the sail is both to deploy and take down. So probably the biggest upgrade to this whole setup over the last couple of weeks is the flotation strategy, because if you watch this series, you know I've really been agonizing over designing a safe flotation self-rescue strategy for a solo canoe. So what I ultimately came up with here is a variation on something that I started working on a few months ago, which is the idea of lashing pool noodles to the inside of the canoe to act as flotation. Now, the first ones I used here were 3 inches in diameter, the full length of the canoe, and I thought it was a great idea, but I didn't love it because it didn't put the flotation where I actually needed it, and it took up space in the end of the canoe. And what I ultimately settled on here was these 4-inch diameter pool noodles that I just recently found on the internet, and I laced these in place, and it was just an absolute revelation, because not only do they give me exactly the right amount of buoyancy, exactly where I need it, so the canoe is self-dumping when I turn it up on its side, but they also give me a little bit of a ledge that I can sit on, both for hiking out when I'm sailing and also for paddling with a single blade. They give me a little space that acts like hip pads, like when I'm using it as a kayak. They have a little ledge underneath them when they're lashed into the canoe that allows the foam mat to tuck underneath. So if I do capsize the boat, the foam mat doesn't end up floating out of the boat. And then finally, they give me a great handle, so when I'm on my side in the water here and I need to get back in the boat, I can just reach inside and push myself up. And this allows me to do an effective re-entry without the help of a stabilizing outrigger. So we've gone from rescues that didn't work at all to rescues that took 1.5 minutes to rescues that took 1 minute, and now I'm down to 30 seconds from capsizing the boat to being back in the boat and paddling again. So that is a huge improvement in the system. So another thing I've been working on here is just an extension of the movable thwart idea that's been part of this canoe from the beginning, which is a single framing member that can be moved to various locations for how you're using the canoe that day, but can also be taken out of the canoe altogether to allow these boats to be nested together and also to be able to lay down in the bottom of the canoe. So the latest variation I've got of this is actually a dual purpose backrest and portage yoke. And this is one of those things that I wouldn't have imagined would have worked because I figured the geometry between those things would be so different. But it turns out a curve that is comfortable enough for your lower back actually still works reasonably well as a portage yoke. Now, this is the one I have for me. The one that you might make for your own lower back might be a little bit different. And once again, the portage yoke part of this isn't perfect, but the reality is that if you're portaging any significant distance, you're not going to be using just a single wooden thwart like this. You're going to be clamping some portage pads onto this in the first place, so the exact shaping of this is kind of moot. So specifically how this guy works is it's got a couple pegs that stick off the bottom of it, which click over the gunnel here underneath this rescue loop, or they click inside of the gunnels right in the center when you'd be using it as a portage yoke, and it has an additional peg that sits up off the top where you can wrap a ball bungee over it that really secures it nice and tightly in place. So pretty functional little thing here. So as long as I'm talking about this movable thwart / rescue loop system here, this is one of those things that just keeps blowing me away with its potential versatility as an attachment point. These shock cord loops that I have in front of me right here and behind me were originally put there so I could slide a paddle underneath them for use as a stabilizer in a rescue scenario. But now that I don't need the paddle anymore, it just really opens these up to be used for anything I might want to attach across the top of the gunnels. You've already seen my catamaran boards that I use to hook the boats together side by side to paddle them that way. You've seen this movable thwart system that can be moved to 3 different locations, but I've also built myself a little lee board bracket that works great for use with a larger sail. I've built myself a mast partners further forward in the boat with another set of loops for the partners for that same sail. And the cool thing about this as an attachment point is that it addresses the biggest problem that we have in skin-on-frame when we're talking about attaching high stress points to a semi-flexible structure, which is how do you effectively dissipate the forces. Now, of course, you can overbuild the whole thing, but then that becomes kind of a big, bulky, heavy thing that's kind of a mismatch to sort of the essence of what skin-on-frame is. And with these things, I can build something that is pretty darn stiff. It's not going to move, but if you really overstress the system, it'll flex a little bit, and it really helps to dissipate all those intense forces. I'm sure I haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what's possible with this. It seems like every week or so I come up with a new thing that I can put underneath these and experiment with. And the nice thing is if that thing ends up being something that I don't want with my canoe, I just take it out from under the loops, set it aside, and it doesn't have to be there anymore. So the last thing I want to talk about here is the dry bag that I've been bringing with me on the water, because anytime you're headed out on the water, you usually want to have some spare clothes with you, some food, some water, your camera. And right now I'm finding that the Watershed Chattooga bag is my day bag of choice. This is a 30-liter dry bag. These things are incredibly well built and they've got a really watertight seal on them. But the reason I'm talking to you about this right now is not because I'm trying to give you a dry bag recommendation. It's because this dry bag has become an integrated part of my overall rescue and safety system. And what I mean by that is that this 4-inch diameter pool noodle system here that is working so well to dump all the water out of the boat ended up working so well that it created a hazard that I wouldn't have expected. And that is that if I fall out of the boat, it automatically dumps the water out and then the wind can take the boat away from me very quickly. And so the way that I've been dealing with that when I've been doing my rescue and re-entries here is that I've got my dry bag here on a 3-foot long 1/8-inch tether. And this can sit behind me or it can sit in front of me between my legs. And if I fall out of the boat, it immediately drags in the water right here, which slows the boat down a little bit. But more importantly, it gives me a place that I can put my arm through quickly. So I'm now connected to the boat by the tether and I can do my rescue without the risk of losing the boat to the wind. So that's the latest version of my Skin-on-Frame canoe here. As usual, there is a lot more to talk about than I have time to talk about on video, but overall, I am really happy with the overall building system. I'm glad that I took the time to back up and fix the final issues with the shaping system, so this is going to be really easily expandable up into full-size solo canoes, double canoes, and then ultimately small rowboats and small sailboats as well. So next step in the process here, I'm going to go ahead and put my head down, finish up the instructional videos, finish up the plan set, and then I'm on track to release this beta version of the video course and the plan set, get you guys building canoes. It's going to be really exciting to see what everybody else does with this super versatile, easy to use, simple canoe building system. All right, that's it for now. Take care. I will see you next time.